said it before you. And when he said that, it was like a little light was switched on in my head. And suddenly it seemed blindingly obvious that this was the case, although I had personally never thought about it until he had said it. And it reminded me a bit like watching the movie, the Monty Python movie, The Life of Brian, and laughing at the antics of the Judean People's Front and the People's Front of Judea and the phony infighting. And the splitters, especially the bit, when somebody says, whatever happened to the People's Popular Front of Judea? And somebody says, that's him standing over there in the front. And you started laughing until suddenly you realised you were laughing at yourself. And you were laughing at thousands of socialists on the left. Because the great tragedy of the political left in this country has been the historical inevitability of the fact that we would split and divide and fight one against the other. And we try to hide that with the language we use, trying to hide it even from ourselves. We talk to talk solidarity, unity, a broad-based party of workers. But when it came down to it, we usually did what we do best, and that is nail the class traitor who dares to disagree with whatever socialist orthodoxy that we happen to hold at any particular time. And the history of left in Scotland is actually littered with examples of this kind of internal bitterness and infighting on the left. Willie Gallagher, the communist MP from Fife, remains a political hero to many on the left. Hugh McDermott actually wrote a poem about him in which he described Gallagher as shining out, single in his purity, lovely in his integrity was another one, a great humanist, a socialist, and a true friend. And yet the same man to the great John McAllion was that communist clown Gallagher. Jimmy Maxton led his ILP MPs out of the Labour Party in the 1930s because he wanted them to be free to follow more left-wing ideas that were contained in the manifesto of the ILP, Socialism in Our Time, and to practice what Jimmy described as revolutionary parliamentarism. Although in my time in the House of Commons I didn't see much evidence of that. And yet Jimmy himself, in his final years, ended in the House of Commons a broken and an isolated figure, patronised by the likes of Churchill, who could describe this one-time revolutionary as the finest gentleman in the House. And coming forward closer to our own time, there's other examples. I remember reading the account of the middle-aged man in a shabby raincoat standing in the rain, selling copies of the Morning Star outside of a meeting, as hundreds brushed past him on their way into the meeting. And it was a very bad morning for him. He only managed to sell 18 copies of the Morning Star. But what was worse was that the meeting that they were rushing past him to get into was the 43rd and final Congress of the Communist Party of Great Britain. And the communists who were going in to vote themselves out of existence couldn't even bring themselves to buy a copy of the Morning Star. I remember from my own experience, Jim Sillars. Jim Sillars was a very brave politician who took the brave decision to break with the Labour Party in Scotland in the 1970s and set up the SLP, the Scottish Labour Party. And the SLP was to be everything that the Cameron and Wilson-led Labour Party wasn't. It would deliver stronger home rule. It would bring about a socialist Scotland. It would have policies far more left-wing than anything that Labour could possibly have come up with. And I was a delegate to the first ever conference in Stirling, in the Golden Lion Hotel, and I can remember vividly being in the audience like yourself, watching Jim Sillars and Alec Neil on the stage, both of them in tears, and making an emotional appeal to the party to support their decision to expel 1/3 of the membership of the Scottish Labour Party because they wanted to be more left-wing than Jim and Alec wanted to be. Now, as it happens, Jim and Alec carried the day in Stirling. But within a couple of years, the party that they had helped to create was utterly destroyed and its membership scattered across other political parties in Scotland, mainly into the Labour Party and into the SNP. And with the left thus defeated, even the Labour government's weak proposals for a Scottish Assembly were thrown out by an unholy alliance of unionists like Neil Kinnock and the Tories in the House of Commons. And if there's a lesson to be learned from all of that experience, then surely it's this, that when socialists fall out, it's those who we claim to represent who suffer. It's the ideas that we Tommy Sheridan wrote an article in the newspapers this morning in which he said that socialists should learn from the past. Well, it's not too late for Tommy and for the socialists who gather at this venue tomorrow to learn from the past and to learn the eternal truth that splitting the left serves no other purpose than to encourage and strengthen the enemies of socialism. And we should never be involved in any of that. You know, the events of this past summer have forced all of us to make choices. And I choose to remain in the Scottish Socialist Party for the same reasons that I joined the Scottish Socialist Party in the first place. And there's any number of those reasons. We now have in Scotland the Scottish Parliament elected under proportional representation. Next year we will have councils across Scotland elected under proportional representation. The British 2.5 party system is finally off our backs in Scotland. And for the first time, the first past the post electoral system that condemned socialists to the margins and prevented people like John McAllion and Harry Mashane ever getting elected in elections doesn't apply anymore. Socialists now standing on an open socialist platform can and already have been elected in elections to this country. And you know, it's no accident that the socialists and the labour movement in this country have always recognised the fundamental importance of proportional representation to the case for building socialism in Scotland. Way back in 1893, at its foundation conference, the Independent Labour Party actually defeated a motion to include the word socialist in their party's title. And they did it because they feel that by using that word, it would be impossible to get anyone elected under first past the post. And you know, I forgot what I was going to say now. Kind of dramatic effect. Some people might actually condemn the ILP for that. But you know, socialists cannot afford to be utopian in a society, particularly in a society where capitalist ideas are hegemonic and where the capitalists control the press and the media and most of the means of communication. We have to be realistic about what we can and can't achieve. I know there are thousands out there who want to vote socialist at the next elections. But I'm also honest enough to recognise there aren't enough of them out there to guarantee that we can win the first past the post seat in any of those elections. We can and we should win our share of the seats that are elected proportionally. We can and we should become a major political force in Scotland. And in fact, ultimately, we can and we should become capable of winning first past the post elections. But it's a very long haul, and we're not going to get there if we don't remain united as a group of socialists. You know, there are other reasons. We actually have at the moment, in 2006, the beginning of the 21st century, some of the most propitious political circumstances that socialists have ever had to work in. We are the only socialist party around at the moment. I can remember when I left the SLP to join the Labour Party in Dundee, and it felt initially like I was arriving home amongst other socialists. A young George Galloway was then the young left-wing organiser in the city. There was a great socialist called Ian Leggett who was actually writing the parliamentary speeches for the Labour MP, Ernie Ross. Those who know Ernie Ross might find this surprising. Because of Ian Leggett's speeches, Ernie was initially known at Westminster as the MP for Moscow West, something that nobody could ever have accused him of towards the end of his parliamentary career. Dundee was leading the fight against council house sales, refusing to implement the Thatcher laws and forcing councils to sell houses. Tony Benn was at that point beginning to mount his campaign to become the deputy leader of the Labour Party. The 1981 Labour programme that became the 1983 Labour manifesto was arguably the most left-wing manifesto that Labour ever fought. since 1945. But all of that was 30 years ago. And that Labour Party simply doesn't exist any longer. It was murdered in its seat by New Labour assassins. New Labour doesn't even pretend to be socialist. It doesn't even pretend to be on the side of the trade unions. Gordon Brown broke cover this week and broke his summer-long silence while Lebanon burned to write an article for the Financial Times. And all he had to say in that article was to threaten further pay restraint on public sector workers in the next spending review. Thinking socialists cannot have anything to do with these people, cannot share a platform with these people. Blair and Brown came together to create a new party that would finally abolish socialism in this country. And any socialist worth his or her salt cannot belong to such a party. They have to come in to the only socialist alternative available to them, which is the Scottish Socialist Party. The SNP are no better. They are following the same trajectory as New Labour, promising to bring in tax cuts for Scottish business to create the macroeconomic circumstances in which Scottish capitalism can flourish. Alec Neil, who left the Labour Party in the 1970s, condemning a Labour government that taxed the rich until their pipsqueak because they were too right-wing, is now himself calling for swinging cuts in income tax in order to free the Scottish entrepreneurial spirit. The Liberal Democrats will join any of the two big parties that promises to give them ministerial caste. Even the Greens are now wanting to get into bed with whichever of the big pro-market parties will allow them that much influence when it comes to decide policies. And you know, if we were to disappear the Scottish Socialist Party, then really there would be no hope for socialists anywhere in this country. Third and final set of reasons which I had for staying in the Scottish Socialist Party is because I recognise the need for socialists to continue to unite against the wars and the poverty and the injustices and the inequalities of global capitalism. All the wars being fought at the moment, the war in Afghanistan, we just heard before I got up to speak, that we think 16 British soldiers have been killed in Afghanistan today. That war in Afghanistan, the war in Iraq, the war in Lebanon, the war that might be happening in Iran in the very near future, are all capitalist wars to control the vast energy resources of the Middle East. And you know, none of these wars are worth the sacrifice of a single worker's life, either in this country or in any other country of the world. Next week I'm going to see a film called An Inconvenient Truth. I haven't seen it, so I don't know what it's about yet, but I'm told it's about the enormous damage being done to the environment by an out-of-control global capitalism. Over 150 years ago, in the Communist Manifesto, Karl Marx warned about the dangers of capitalist production and the dangers of the private accumulation of capital. And at the beginning of this century, those warnings are coming home to roost. Revolutions in transport and communications have freed capital to exploit people and resources on a truly global scale, and without a single thought being given to what the damaging consequences might be for the people of this world. We have to end the age of capitalism now, before the age of capitalism ends us all in an environmental catastrophe. The SSP was brought into existence, one, because of the tremendously hopeful circumstances that existed in Scottish politics at this time for the left to prosper. But secondly, to face one of the most serious challenges that we've ever faced as a human race on the planet, the challenge of environmental destruction. And when we face challenges of that kind, it doesn't really matter who says what about who. It doesn't really matter who has got more charisma than somebody else. It doesn't matter who leads this party. Eugene Debs, the great American socialist, says, I wouldn't lead you to the promised land because if I could lead you in, somebody else could lead you out. The SSP is not that kind of party. Our role is to teach workers to be confident about themselves, to explain to them that it's through their own collective action that they can create a better world for themselves. The real victory in Scotland for Murdoch and his putrid publications would be to see the promises that made by the SSP rent by infighting and recriminations amongst the people who have done so well to get the SSP to where it is today. £200,000 would be a small price to pay for that kind of achievement. And comrades, we can't allow Murdoch and the News of the World to boast in that kind of achievement. We've got to stop it. Whatever happens tomorrow, we go on, and we go on stronger and more united and more determined than we were before, because we are the answer to the working class in this country, and we will prevail and we will win. Thanks very much.